Hey folks, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Michel Bryant. I am here with Julie Rendelman. She is going to join me in the studio, and I've also got Ann Bremner standing by from Seattle. We have, if you've just joined us, I have to apologize because we're only covering 3 trials today. So bear with us here. We'll try and beef things up as we move forward. But if you missed this morning, we got a verdict in the case involving the Vermont teenagers who were killed by this gentleman, Stephen Burgoyne. 5 children killed in a head-on collision. 7 counts against him. 2 were sort of throwaway vehicular-related cases, but the other 5 were second-degree murder, found guilty on all counts. He'll be sentenced at a later date, and he's looking at anything from 20 years to life in prison. Something interesting about Vermont, a lot of things interesting there, but they actually do take a mitigation aggravation series of statements. Those penalties could be mitigated downward. Not likely in this case, in my opinion, but it's possible. You could even get 10 years for second-degree murder in Vermont. We're also in the Timothy Jones case out of South Carolina. As you know, another case involving the death of 5 youngsters. This is Timothy Jones Jr., who has effectively described how he has killed his 5 children, ages 8 through 1 year old. They are in the defense case now, wrapping that thing up. We will dip into that as necessary, keep you posted on what's going on there. The jury should have the case very soon in that South Carolina courtroom. All afternoon, though, we have been riveted by this Kellen Winslow II case. This is California versus Kellen Winslow, the former NFL player. He is accused of 12 counts of sex-related crimes against 5 Jane Doe victims. Yesterday, we heard Jane Doe number 1. And the response to Jane Doe number 1 has been across the board. Most of it not good for the prosecution. And we're going to let you kind of sample some of this and judge for yourself. We will then get back into the courtroom live. Alleged victim number 2 has been testifying today. But before we get to that again, in the Kellen Winslow II case, this is Jane Doe number 1. So there's Jane Doe number 1. The counts that she is connected to are forcible rape and kidnapping. I want to approach this from 2 fronts here. Let me start with Julie Rendelman. First of all, this is the direct testimony, supposedly the best stuff for the prosecution. Give me your take on her direct testimony.
I never want to say this, but I'm going to. There's witnesses that take the stand, especially in something as brutal, what we expect in terms of rape, and there's someone that moves the jury or provides some level of sympathy. There's something about the way she's testifying to me that does not garner kind of the sympathy and credibility one would expect or as a prosecutor hope for when we're talking about such a brutal crime.
Right, and I sit there and listen to this, and Ann Bremner chime in on this. I'm thinking, she's like a pit bull. She's angry about everything. She's combative, and I'm thinking, would he have a chance against her? I mean, she just seems to be not exactly a shrinking violet. Ann, what do you think?
Well, I agree, and I did sex crimes for a long time as a prosecutor, and I've had witnesses like this before. And it's kind of like we used to say, the crimes committed in hell, you don't have angels as witnesses. It doesn't really apply here, but I had cases with prostitutes, sex workers, et cetera, in rape cases. And she'll, of course, be buttressed by the other witnesses in this case because there's a pattern here. It'll go to identity too. The pattern evidence will go to his identity in her case and common scheme or plan. But yeah, she's calling it like she sees it. It's tough for us, though, to watch her and not be able to see her. It always bugs me that you have rape victims, you look at their laps or their hands. I understand the privacy, but the credibility assessment goes with the whole person. No,
I agree, and in California, that happens to be the way they do it. But the point you make, I think, is going to be buttressed when we see Jane Doe number 2. And what we see from her is much more reserved. She's so quiet, you can barely hear her voice. And she says so many things, Julie, that are consistent with victim number 1 that help victim number 1's testimony. It's almost like, well, how can I hold against her that she's kind of a pit bull and the other one is a floppy-eared rabbit when the same things kind of happen to them?
Well, I mean, the issue with number 1, Jane Doe number 1, isn't just that she's not sympathetic. It's also that her credibility is damaged quite a lot by the defense. The prosecution is very lucky because they don't just have her. And we see this a lot even in the Harvey Weinstein case where the prosecutor wants more and more witnesses to come in to kind of add on to the one crime. You have the one crime that might not be that strong, you bring in other witnesses, you start to make it stronger.
And I think we're starting to see why the prosecution was so adamant about getting these cases all together, because generally you got 5 cases, 5 baskets. Why are they all together? Well, we're going to see what Julie was mentioning here just in a moment. We're going to have the cross-examination by the defense, and you're going to see the credibility is a bit of a problem with this Jane Doe number 1. We'll come right back to Law&Crime Network. Stay right here. So, defense making some points here in this case against their client, Kellen Winslow. This lady is a little confused, maybe. Remember, there was a preliminary hearing, there was a police investigation, there's some inconsistencies, but most importantly, and Ann Bremner in Seattle, let me ask you this. First of all, thank you for spending your lunch here. The court is on lunch as well, but you're working, so I appreciate that. What I want to know is this. When you hear her testify, Jane Doe number 1, and she seems kind of tough, she's had all these opportunities to flee at the very least, but she's afraid. She's afraid to leave. I mean, is anybody buying that?
It's going to be tough for the jury, and she's got all that testimony from the preliminary hearing that's contradicting her, at least in part. So that, coupled with the fact that she was allegedly dishonest with respect to her alcohol history, you know, that Latin phrase, falsus in unum, falsus in plurium, or falsus in omnibus, false in one, false in all.
Let me hold it. I need to get my Latin dictionary, but I'm going to take your word for that. I missed that day of class, I think.
Right. But, you know, I think that that's going to be, that's may come down to that with at least this witness.
Yeah, and I think when they get the jury instruction is very clear. It says if a witness is false on one thing, they don't do it in Latin because, you know, I couldn't figure that out either. That they are judged potentially to be false on other matters. So Julie Rendelman, she's got a lot of things that she's outrightly lied about. I mean, how do you overcome that?
She's lied about things, although some of the things she's been mistaken. There is a difference between the two. And just to play devil's advocate for a moment,
which you do once in a while.
Hard for me to do, but one of the things you can say is that, you know, victims of rape are not necessarily victims of rape where someone is using a gun or a knife. Someone can intimidate them simply by their size, simply by the fact they're in an area where they don't know where they are, we're worried they won't know where to go, things like that. So you can kind of, there is a little wiggle room, although I think that even in this case, her credibility is at question.
Yeah, so I take that point. That's a good point. You don't want to hold against her the fact she seems to be a little tougher just because she generally sounds that way. And quickly, what do you think of the second witness, which we're going to hear from in the next hour? You heard some of it. Do you think it helps the first victim or hurts?
Well, I think it helps, and I think that the consistencies there and patterns, that's what's going to be important to the jury. Okay,
well, we're going to find out. We will get to that second Jane Doe coming up after the top of the hour, so stay right where you are. Don't forget the Stephen Burgoyne case. That's been decided. Guilty verdicts against this man for the killing of the 5 teenagers. He'll be sentenced at some future date. We will be back here in just a few moments, and the Kellen Winslow trial will be back underway soon. They're on a break now. We will join them when they get back. Hope you stay right where you are. This is the Law and Crime Network.